Sunday, July 22, 2022. Shinpei is heading home to mourn his stepsister's death, but something feels wrong. He looks over to his right and sees his dead sister next to him. She tells him to stay still as she places her hand on his right eye. She says that it's a present and tells him to take care of her younger sister before she disappears. Shinpei reaches out and calls out her name, Ushio, when suddenly, he finds himself in the valley of Plot Mountain. He thinks about what just happened, but realizes he shouldn't dwell too long as it was just a dream. Hitogashima is a small island with a population of 700. Shinpei left the island 2 years ago to study in Tokyo. He came back to attend his stepsister's funeral. He has 2 stepsisters, the younger of which is still alive and healthy. Mio is excited to greet her older brother, maybe a little too excited as she rides straight into the ocean. She's as energetic as ever, but Shinpei knows that she can't be doing well after losing her sister. At the funeral, Shinpei's best friend hugs him from behind while bawling out, telling him that Ushio died while trying to save a kid from drowning. So, points out the little girl Ushio saved, who seems completely lifeless in front of them. He tells Shinpei that Shiori hasn't spoken a single word since the incident. After, Shinpei goes home to have a family dinner with his foster family, when suddenly, we see another Mio in her school uniform. Tetsu, a police officer on duty, asks if Mio is okay. She looks at him, smiling, as the scene goes black. Later during the night, So hits up Shinpei to tell him more about what happened with Ushio's death. He tells him that there were marks on Ushio's neck, as if someone strangled her. Shinpei is speechless as he thinks of the possibility that Ushio was murdered. He asks why there wasn't an autopsy, and So explains that the police knew about the marks on her neck, but given the accounts of the witnesses and the overwhelming evidence of a drowning incident, the police decided to close the case without investigating further. After the call, Mio gives Shinpei the necklace that Ushio was wearing before she died. He thinks back to when he gave it to her, and can't believe she's kept it with her for so long. The next day, Shinpei is helping out at his family's restaurant when Tetsu walks in. He asks for the usual, while he checks up on a new mobile game that he's excited to play. Shinpei asks what he meant by the usual, but Mio already knows. Mio asks why he was later than usual today, and Tetsu explains that Shiori and her parents suddenly vanished. Tetsu received a ping about the fishy incident, and decided to go to their residence, where he found that no one was there. Shocked from what she just heard, Mio runs out of the store, and Shinpei chases after her. Shinpei finds her cradled up on a corner, and Mio apologizes for running out. She tells him that before Ushio died, Shiori said something weird, telling Mio that she saw a girl who looked exactly like herself. Shinpei is confused, but a random stranger interjects, saying that it was probably a shadow. Neizu tells them that it's called the shadow sickness, a disease native to this island, and that every person who has seen their shadow has never lived for long to tell the tale. He adds that once the shadow ends the victim, it pretends to be the victim and takes the lives of everyone the victim loves. Mio shivers in fear. She tells Shinpei that she was with Ushio cleaning the beach 3 days before her death, when they both saw Ushio's shadow. Shinpei shouts, telling Mio to stop messing around, but Mio says she's telling the truth. Shinpei is overwhelmed, but gets himself to calm down seeing Mio cry. Neizu mentioned that there was a shrine where people can cleanse themselves of the disease, so they decide to head there to investigate. Shinpei rings the doorbell, but no answer. The door is locked. Shinpei looks at Mio to see her face frozen. He looks towards that direction, and a shadowy figure dashes away. They chase after it, and end up by a ledge, when suddenly, they hear a gunshot. They head towards the direction of the sound, when Shinpei finds the lady from the boat, sweating profusely and panting while she bleeds out. She grabs him, and tells him to listen carefully, when suddenly, Mio's shadow speaks, telling Shinpei that Dad used to always say that the restaurant isn't closed until you wash the dishes and clean everything up. Darkness fills the air, but without emptiness. Shinpei wakes up to find himself lost again in the valley of Plot Mountain. After another slap on the face, Shinpei has a vague memory of her getting shot, so he asks her if she was ever shot by a handgun before. She asks him if he's feeling okay, but he realizes he's being weird, so he takes back what he asked, thinking that it was just a bad dream. He checks his phone again to see that it is still the 22nd. He gets off the boat, and for some reason, he feels like he is repeating the events from yesterday. He even recognizes the distinct blue and white panties that Mio was wearing when she fell into the ocean. He follows the rest of the day exactly how it went in what he believes to have been a dream, but he can't help but to feel that the events he experienced were real. His head is spinning, so he goes outside to get some air, when he hears Tetsu's voice. He sees Mio, wondering why she's outside in her school uniform, when suddenly, he witnesses a brutal sight. He realizes that the figure before him is a shadow. He sees a flash, and not long after, a shadow of Tetsu is born. Tetsu's shadow touches the real Tetsu, and after another flash, the body disappears, leaving a black marking on the floor. Shinpei hears Tetsu's shadow go through Tetsu's life history, realizing that the copycat has the memory of its victim, and can even replicate the victim's personality. Shinpei pants heavily, and bad timing for him as his phone goes off. He thinks it's fortunate that his phone was on vibrate. But he was wrong. Darkness fills the air without emptiness, but this time, he sees himself traveling through space and time. He hears a voice, similar to Ushio's. He can only make out the words, "Be careful and protect Mio," as he feels a familiar embrace. He's back to the beginning, but he starts at the dock. Deja vu again, but he remembers Ushio telling him to protect Mio, so he does just that. Mio knows he can't swim, so she reacts quickly.
Are you okay?
Other than the weird Japanese I have fantasies about my stepbrother stepsister thing, same events throughout the day until Shinpei makes a prank call to the police department to prevent Tetsu from encountering Mio's shadow. He sets up his phone outside in order to get a recording of Mio's shadow. In the bathroom now, Shinpei collects his courage, determined to figure out as much as possible in the current time loop. He looks in the mirror, and for the first time, he sees the change in his right eye. He hears someone showering. He knows that Mio's shadow never entered the house in the previous time loops, so he has absolutely no reason to barge in on the real Mio in the shower. But he barges in anyways, to find the real Mio, taking a real shower. Mark this on the books as a sus anime moment, because we all know this guy just wanted to peek at his little sister. The next day, Shinpei shows Mio a recording of her own shadow, confirming her beliefs that they exist. She tells him that they need to save Shiori before she is also killed by her own shadow, but Shinpei tells her that he'll go alone. The next door neighbor is also curious about Shiori and her family. The door is open. Food is left on the dining table, untouched. The TV is still on. Shinpei walks to the living room and sees black markings on the floor. He's confirmed that this is the work of shadows, but he only sees the markings of two adult-like figures. He goes upstairs to investigate more. He realizes now that Shiori was a shadow this whole time. Shiori's shadow makes a shadow of Shinpei, but before she can attack him, the next door neighbor comes up, and the shadow disappears. After, Shinpei heads back to the family restaurant, when the real Tetsu walks in this time. He hands over Ushio's phone. He says that she requested Tetsu to give it to Shinpei if anything were to happen to her, as if she knew that she was going to die. Later, Shinpei tells So about the shadows, who now believes in the possibility that Ushio was strangled by a shadow. The group decide to ask the village chief if he knows anything about the shadows, tomorrow at the summer festival. The next day, So's sister tells Shinpei to put on some pants as they barge into his room, telling him to get ready for the festival. Shinpei sees his cute, little sister in a kimono. She asks Shinpei what he thinks while she blushes. So butts in and says that she looks great. At the festival, So tells Shinpei that he's going to confess his love to Mio tonight. Mio walks in on the boys and asks what they're talking about. So gets flustered and says that they were talking about watermelons and plot armor. Mio's virgin ears are violated, and Takiko brings up how she heard that Shinpei walked in on Mio showering. So strangles him for being a dirty boy, while Takiko asks Shinpei how he feels about his cute stepsister. Shinpei says he loves her like family, and Mio is disappointed. Just then, Shinpei looks to the crowd and sees a figure that looks like Ushio. Without a second thought, he chases after her and ends up by the ocean, where he finds her standing in awe of the fireworks.
Ushio.
She asks him why he's back at the island. He sees her necklace and realizes that she is a shadow, but she doesn't seem to know, and seems to think that she is the real deal. She says her last memory was when she was drowning, and remembers asking for one wish, to see Shinpei one last time. She tells him that she's happy her wish came true. Shinpei tells himself again that she can't be real, but for some reason, her words are piercing through his heart. She tells him that there's one more thing she wanted to say.
Shinpei, I love you!
But Shinpei refuses to be fooled. He asks her what her goal is playing this game. She doesn't understand the question, but looks at the fireworks and changes the topic, telling him that she wants to go to the festival with him. Shinpei wonders if this shadow actually thinks she is Ushio. Everyone stares at the weird girl in a swimsuit, so Shinpei decides to hide her until he figures out what the hell is going on. He talks with her for 2 hours, and he senses nothing suspicious. She even punches like the old Ushio, as Shinpei confirms that at the very least, she doesn't have any ill intent, thinking that she could have already ended him by now if she wanted to. She seemingly doesn't even know what a shadow is, as he realizes there's some sort of gap in her memory. He gets a call from a worried Mio, so he tells Ushio to stay put, and that he'll be back to pick her up. Back with the group, So confesses to Mio, telling her that he loves her. Takiko tells Shinpei that she knows Mio will reject So, saying that Mio has someone else in her heart. Shinpei asks her who, and Takiko gets flustered, telling him to forget what she just said. Suddenly, a not-so-ambiguous Ushio appears in a mask. She cheers So up, and everyone immediately knows who that is. She says she's not Ushio, and that she is the warrior of love. She obviously doesn't fool anyone, so Ushio apologizes to Shinpei, saying that she just really wanted to see everyone, but Mio won't be fooled. She tells Shinpei to get away from that monster. Suddenly, Shinpei grabs Ushio tightly, and tells Mio that he won't let go. He grips even harder, asking Ushio what the hell she's doing, as we find out that he is actually Shinpei's shadow. Ushio's shadow tells everyone to run, but Shinpei's shadow tells them it's already too late. 10 minutes earlier, the real Shinpei was heading towards the group when he saw Mio's shadow at work. She chokes him while she says that she found out about the recording after Shiori made a shadow copy of him. She throws him, and Shinpei panics as he sees all the markings of the latest victims. Shinpei's shadow appears, confused with the current memory he has. It updates its memory to the current after touching Shinpei, realizing that he's been in a time loop. Mio's shadow is about to end him, but Shinpei's shadow stops her, saying that they should keep him alive until the ritual is complete, so that he doesn't restart the events again. Shinpei's shadow heads to Shinpei's friends, while Mio breaks his arm. She's about to break his leg, when suddenly, the lady from the boat appears to save the day. Izuru knows how to take it down as she shoots point blank at the shadow. Izuru attends to Shinpei's arm and begins to tell him everything she knows. Shadows feed on humans, they replace them, and have grown massively in numbers in the past few days. Shinpei has a million questions, but interjects when they see a big flash at the top of the shrine and asks for her help to rescue Mio and his friends before he runs off ahead. He gets to the top and is shocked to see a horrific, shadowy creature and a mountain of corpses behind it. Shinpei is frozen in fear as he subconsciously counts 11 shadows when suddenly he sees a bloodied So protecting Mio. So's shadow goes for Mio next, but Izuru responds. She has 1 bullet left. The big shadow makes a shadow of Izuru and Izuru is able to dodge a fatal blow. The shadow grabs Shinpei and takes a good look at the right eye as it says that it is the long-lost eye of its mother. It tells Shinpei that it doesn't know how he got it, but tells him to sit tight and watch as the ritual completes. Shinpei crawls towards Mio, desperate to keep her alive.
Wait for me!
He reaches out, when suddenly, the final meal is ready. The shadow says, "Please enjoy to your heart's content, and grant me the last of your strength, Mother." The shadow on the ground expands as it consumes every living soul on the island. Izuru apologizes to Shinpei as she is ready to throw in the cards, but Shinpei won't give up. He tells her that he's lived a life of regret, but refuses to die with another one under his belt. He says it's not too late, and tells her to shoot him.
Some pretty crazy stuff, don't you?
She points her gun, but the shadow heard everything, and obviously won't allow it, when suddenly,
Go back in time to the 22nd. Just remember to tell me your name, and I'll save you.
time loops back to the 22nd, but this time, Shinpei isn't alone, as we see Shadow Ushio on the beach. Arriving on Hitogashima, Hizuru is about to step on a man's shadow, but the shadow moves, confirming that the man is a shadow. She then sees Mio heading towards Shinpei, calling him Shin, and wonders if he is the Shinpei she is looking for. Hizuru sees a notification about Ushio's funeral, and recognizing the name, she decides to attend it. There, even after 14 years, Masahito Karikiri recognizes Hizuru, who steps on his shadow and confirms that he isn't one of them. Hizuru wonders if Ushio is from the Kofune restaurant, and Masahito confirms, saying there was an accident yesterday. Alan Kofune, father of Ushio and stepfather of Shinpei, also remembers Hizuru, and is surprised to see her. Hizuru recalls that during her second year of middle school, she was a frequent visitor at Kofune restaurant. She would meet young Ushio there, as she recalls a chatty little girl, who enjoyed her company. Hizuru asks about Shinpei, and Alan explains it's his best friend's son, who he adopted right after Hizuru left the island. Masahito explains that about 10 years ago, both of his parents died in a boating accident. Hearing that, Hizuru realizes that the boy sitting in front of her on the boat was Shinpei, but she decides to avoid him for now. Asako Kobayakawa recognizes Hizuru, an old friend of her, who was visiting the Kofune restaurant with her. Asako explains that Ushio saved her daughter, Shiori, during the accident. However, Hizuru notices that Asako's shadow is avoiding her foot. Seeing the rest of the Kobayakawas, Hizuru gets angry, acting like they care for Ushio. Hizuru reveals to Neizu that the whole Kobayakawa family are shadows. As they are growing in numbers, Neizu states that one of them has the ability to produce more shadows. Meanwhile, Shinpei reaches the funeral, and decides to repeat all the conversations he had in the previous time loops. Shinpei notices an ant walking over Asako's shadow, and her husband's shadow, and they avoid being stepped on by the ant, as Shinpei realizes now that they are already shadows. As they leave, Mio approaches him, and Shinpei asks her if she wore white panties yesterday. Mio is shocked that it's the first thing he asks her after 2 years. Shinpei recalls that he managed to see Mio's panties when she killed him, but today she is wearing blue and white striped panties. Mio confirms it, and he realizes she was copied not today, but sometime yesterday. Elsewhere, Shadow Mio produces a shadow with Alan's memories. At 1:30 p.m., Ushio's casket enters the furnace, and everyone has lunch in a room. Shinpei plans to ask 2 questions to everyone at the funeral. The first is if they had heard about the shadow sickness, and second, if they had seen a lady with gigantic watermelons. As he asks around, Alan tells him the lady is Hizuru, and gives him a note she gave him. Shinpei recognizes the text as being a code. After cracking it, Shinpei calls the phone number, and Neizu picks up. After Shinpei introduces himself, Neizu does the same, and states he is an acquaintance to Hizuru. As Shinpei is in the crematorium, Neizu tells him to go back alone to the funeral entrance. Getting there, Neizu tells him to stand still, and he shoots at Shinpei's shadow. At the same time, Alan goes to the bathroom. Hizuru follows him, and puts maintenance note on the stall he enters, and goes into the other. A shadow Alan then comes, and as he opens her stall, she smashes the shadow on the ground with a hammer and kills the shadow Alan. After confirming Shinpei isn't a shadow, Neizu invites him to a secret location. As he meets Neizu there, Neizu tells him that he has some questions. Neizu notes that to solve the code, he needed to know the author, Ryu Nagumo, and her real name. However, Hizuru hasn't told anyone else, except Neizu, that she is Ryu. Which would mean, no one could call the phone unless there is a shadow that copied Hizuru. Hizuru appears and Shinpei gives her his copy of Swampman and asks her for an autograph. Hizuru notes that he isn't normal, and signs his book. She notes that he didn't know who she was on the boat, and that there is no way to know her identity unless she revealed it herself. Hizuru concludes that this isn't the first time he experienced July 22nd, and figures out that he must be a time traveler. Shinpei confirms that she is correct. She then believes it wasn't her who made the reveal, and wonders if Shinpei met her brother. Hizuru explains that she met a shadow 14 years ago, and it killed her family. However, she tells him she can't reveal anything more about her past, saying that if the shadows copy Shinpei, they will learn her secret. Neizu says that shadows target families, and Shinpei now realizes why he, Ushio and Mio are targeted, and wonders about Alan, but Hizuru states she already killed his shadow. Neizu explains that once your shadow is killed, they can no longer copy you again. Neizu himself admits to having this immunity. Shinpei explains that they have until the summer festival, 54 hours from now, but says he wants to start with taking out Mio's shadow. Hizuru agrees, but states she will first take care of the Kobayakawas. In front of Kobe Mart, Hizuru turns into Ryu. She appears to have a split personality, and when she ties her hair, Ryu comes out. Ryu rings the doorbell and Asako opens. Ryu says he brought souvenirs. Asako then introduces her family, her husband Tatsuo and daughter Shiori. As Ryu enters, he opens his luggage and takes out a hammer, and immediately smashes Asako's head. Meanwhile, Shinpei wonders if Hizuru has a dual personality, but Neizu states he is close, but not quite. Back to Hizuru, Tatsuo then attacks Ryu, but he smashes his head too. Ryu gets a glimpse of his death, and then avoids Asako's attack, revealing that he has the ability to see seconds into the future. He proceeds by smashing her shadow, and killing her. Shinpei wants to know more about Ryu, and Neizu explains he was Hizuru's twin brother, but she found him dead 14 years ago. He had bite marks all over his body, making people think it was wild dogs, but the bites were a distraction for the strangle marks on his neck, identical to the strangle marks on Ushio's neck. No one believed Hizuru that this was murder, and they cremated his body before they could find out anything else. Meanwhile, Ryu smashes Shiori's shadow. Shiori takes damage, but manages to separate part of her shadow, surrounding the hammer and surviving with just injuries. Shiori then grabs Ryu by the neck, strangling him and commenting that he is dangerous since he knows how to kill their kind. Ryu manages to grab some chopsticks, and as Shiori's shadow is on him, he stabs himself to hit the shadow. But Shiori manages to escape. Ryu texts Neizu, informing them that Asako and Tatsuo are dead, but that Shiori went on the 3rd floor. They proceed with Plan B, and Neizu takes out some nail guns for him and Shinpei. On the 3rd floor, Ryu enters Shiori's room and texts Neizu that she managed to escape from the window. He feels her presence behind him, and tells her it's pointless to try and copy, because he'll use the few seconds when she's immobile to kill her. Realizing she can't copy Hizuru, Shiori retreats into her shadow, and escapes from the window. Neizu then starts shooting her with his nail gun. He hits her 2 times, but Shiori manages to escape past him. As she is about to escape, Shinpei comes out and charges at Shiori, tackling her to the ground. Shiori bites him, but Neizu shoots 3 nails at her shadow, and tells Shinpei it's safe to let her go as she won't be able to escape now, since piercing a shadow 3 times stops them from moving. Shiori laughs, and Ryu realizes that she is different than the other shadows. Ryu asks Shiori if she was the one that killed Ushio, and Shiori confirms it. Shinpei gets angry and asks what their goal is. Shiori states the end is coming this summer, and that she is gathering her family to leave this place. Ryu smashes Shiori and kills her, stating that if you talk with a shadow for too long, you'll get confused, and begin to think that they're the real thing. After exchanging numbers, Shinpei heads home, and sees Mio with a bloody knife. He is shocked, but then sees she is cutting onions, and sees that she ended up cutting herself. Shinpei takes the knife, and steps on her shadow to confirm she is human, and decides to proceed making curry himself. Mio goes to wash her face, when moments later, Shinpei hears a stomach growl, and he sees Ushio, who confirms that she is hungry. Ushio appears behind Shinpei and is happy to see he is making his curry. Shinpei is surprised, and comments that she should have appeared on the 24th at the festival. Shinpei realizes that she had already been at the festival, realizing that she traveled back in time with him from the previous loop. As Mio comes in, Shinpei hides Ushio under the counter, and when she gets the chance, Ushio runs into Shinpei's room without her noticing. Once inside his room, Shinpei sees Ushio, who is eagerly waiting for the curry. Ushio explains she walked from the beach, where she suddenly found herself after waking up. Recalling Mio calling her a monster, Ushio states she stayed out of sight, and that no one saw her. Shinpei touches Ushio's shadow, who gets startled and states that it tickles. Shinpei recalls when he told Ushio that he will be going to Tokyo and entering a culinary school. He told her that he couldn't keep being a burden to Kofune family, but in reality, he loves Ushio, and wanted to leave the household to prevent the two from really becoming brother and sister. Ushio tells him that she wants to stop the monsters, and both agree to work together to prevent the events at the festival. Shinpei wonders if Ushio can copy people, but Ushio doesn't seem to know how. In 10 minutes, Shadow Mio is to appear in front of their house. Hizuru, who turned into her brother Ryu, asks Neizu if he is in position, and he confirms. Meanwhile, Shinpei asks Ushio if she isn't going to change clothes. Ushio then realizes it's indeed weird to stay in a swimsuit, but in that moment, her swimsuit starts to disappear. As she ends up naked, she punches Shinpei for seeing her, and asks him to give her some clothes. He gives her a shirt, and explains that Mio's shadow is coming. Shinpei says that Mio's shadow never entered the house before, so there is nothing to worry about. But contrary to that opinion, we see Mio's shadow entering the house. Shadow Mio comes to Shinpei's room, and attempts to stab him, but Ushio protects him and takes the hit. Ushio then pushes Mio back, but she enters her shadow, and comes out to stab Ushio's shadow, wounding her. Shinpei realizes he can't win, and opens the curtains. Mio then looks at Ushio, and asks her why she protected him. Ushio states she loves Shinpei, and there is nothing wrong in siding with the one you love. Mio starts yelling that Ushio died, and turns towards Shinpei to kill him. In that moment, Neizu blows her head through the window. Shinpei drops on his knees, and stabs Mio's shadow. Ryu enters Shinpei's room, and as he is about to smash Ushio's head, Shinpei protects her with his body, stopping Ryu. Shinpei states he knows that Ryu hates shadows, and their goal is to eliminate them all, but Ushio had saved him twice. Shinpei begs Hizuru to save Ushio, and treat her wound. Hizuru then realizes Ushio's voice is the same as the message she received that led her to the island, and decides to help her. Once outside, Hizuru pours water on Ushio's arm, which then disappears. Ushio panics, but then states it doesn't hurt. Hizuru explains the wound was a projection of the damage done to her main body. Hizuru then plays her the message, in which Ushio states that the shadows kill everyone at the festival, requesting Hizuru's help and that the only one who can stop them is Shinpei. However, Ushio has no memories of making the recording. Neizu wonders why Mio's shadow acted differently this time, and entered the house. Shinpei states she knew they killed Shiori. Hizuru guesses that Mio acknowledged them as a threat, and moved to eliminate them. Hizuru tells him that they can't continue to work together, if he intends to stick with Ushio's shadow. She agrees that Ushio at the moment has no ill intention, and is probably faulty, but at some point she may get fixed. In the morning of the 23rd, Shinpei proceeds doing what he did in the previous loops, and goes to work at the restaurant. He receives Ushio's phone from Tetsu, and so comes to the restaurant. Shinpei and Ushio tell So everything that has happened, as they know that he isn't a target of the shadows. They are at the private beach where Ushio died, but Shadow Ushio has no memories of Ushio's death. Shinpei gives her phone, stating he wanted to look through it, but it was locked. Ushio realizes the password had changed, but unlocks it with her fingerprint. As she looks at it, she sees there is a video from 20th in the morning, the day she died. Watching the video, Shinpei and the rest see Ushio, who states she has a message for Shinpei, and guesses that if he or anyone else is watching it, it would mean she is dead. She then calls her shadow, and the two Ushio stand next to each other. Ushio explains that her shadow isn't an evil one, and it's likely that she is right now standing next to Shinpei, as only the two Ushios can unlock the phone. Ushio then states that everything started with Shiori. On July 17th, at Kobe Mart, Ushio and Mio are shopping, and Shiori tells them that she was followed by a lookalike. However, they don't take her seriously, guessing it's just some creep, and tell her she needs to report it to Tetsu and the police. The next day on July 18th, while cleaning the beach, Ushio sees a flash, and as she turns, she sees her shadow and points it to Mio. Shadow Ushio then runs, and Ushio goes after her, but loses her, and only finds her hat, which then disappears. She recalls what Shiori said, and returns to the beach to talk with her, and tells her she believes her now. At home, Mio thinks that Shinpei will come this year, but Ushio states she doesn't care, and that he can stay in Tokyo forever. However, Mio then teases her that she doesn't mean it, as she knows she loves him. Ushio then heads to take a bath, but finds Shadow Ushio in the bathtub. Ushio tries to call Mio, but Shadow Ushio stops her. She explains that she is Ushio Kofune, and came back to her house, but hid as she saw Ushio with Mio. The two of them then think the other is the shadow, but then realizes that if shadows are real, then Shiori's shadow is somewhere on the island. They recall that Shiori mentioned she saw her shadow for the first time on Mount Takanosu and both agree to investigate it together. The two head in the mountain, but are unable to find anything. Shadow Ushio then sees a sign, stating it's dangerous ahead, and they decide to proceed. They reach the old Hishigata family clinic, which had rumors of being haunted. Shadow Ushio has a weird feeling of being there before. Suddenly, they hear a noise, and see a shadow holding a crow. The shadow then flashes, and copies Ushio. The third Ushio attacks them, and pins Shadow Ushio to a tree. Ushio attempts to attack the third Ushio, but her attacks have no effect. She ends up hitting her shadow by accident, which hurts the third Ushio, who then kicks Ushio away. Third Ushio then stabs Shadow's Ushio shadow, injuring her leg. At first Shadow Ushio is surprised, but then figures that a shadow's weakness is their flat shadow, which would mean she isn't a human. Shadow Ushio then uses her hair to cut third Ushio's arm, and free herself. As third Ushio runs, Shadow Ushio follows her, realizing that her real body is the shadow, and the projected body is a weapon to protect the real body. She catches up to third Ushio, and slashes her shadow, killing her. Ushio tells Shadow Ushio that she is cool. Shadow Ushio then flashes, and updates her data, copying her data on her healthy foot, and heals her own foot. Realizing now what she is, Shadow Ushio explains that she will eventually disappear, but if she kills the original, she will become the original. Her instincts tell her to kill Ushio, but for some reason, she is able to stop herself from doing so. As they finish watching the video, Shinpei realizes that the two Ushio tried to save Shiori. Shadow Ushio tells him that she now remembers everything, including her powers. She then offers them to replay the past from her memory data, and show them what happened on the private beach on July 21st. Shadow Ushio then shows them the beach on the 21st. She takes them to where she and Ushio were, where Shadow Ushio copies Ushio in her swimsuit. Ushio asks Shadow Ushio if she can become her shell necklace, and Shadow Ushio turns into it. Ushio then puts on the necklace, and takes the real one to her bag. Shiori is mocked by Hamaji for being unable to swim, and she asks Mio how to become a great swimmer, and Mio decides to teach her. Ushio then comes and states that she will protect Shiori, but Shiori wonders what she means. A young girl, Akari, had pooped in her swimsuit, and Hamaji tells Mio, who decides to take Akari to clean her. While they were looking away, Shiori ends up in the water, and begins to drown. Shadow Ushio tells Ushio that she senses a shadow under the water. Mio leaves Akari to Takiko and wants to go and help her with so, but Ushio stops them, and asks them to leave it to her. Ushio jumps in the water and swims to Shiori, who is being dragged deeper underwater by Shadow Shiori. Shadow Ushio turns back to her Ushio form, and slashes Shadow Shiori's arm. She grabs Shiori, and heads to the surface, but Shadow Shiori's arm is still on her, and surrounds them with shadow arms. Ushio pulls Shadow Shiori out of them, but Shadow Shiori starts strangling her. Ushio tells Shadow Ushio to ignore her, and continue to save Shiori. Moments later, Shadow Shiori catches up to Shadow Ushio, wanting them to stop, and Shadow Ushio sees Ushio's body falling down towards the bottom. Shadow Ushio slashes Shadow Shiori, but Shiori manages to grab her, and realizes that Shadow Ushio is faulty. She attempts to fix her, but as she senses that Mio and So are coming, she releases Shadow Ushio, who starts falling towards the bottom, erases Shiori, and then acts unconscious for Mio and So to save her. As they watch on, Shadow Ushio apologizes for not being able to save Shiori, but promises that she will help Shinpei wipe out the shadows. So is angry and states he wants to kill Shadow Shiori, but Shinpei tells him he already did. Suddenly, Shadow Shiori, who is carried by Mio, then grabs Shinpei's arm, stating she found him. Shinpei is surprised as this is supposed to just be a recording, and that they shouldn't be able to interact with others. Shadow Ushio tells him that this isn't part of her memory. Shadow Shiori then turns into Hina, stating she was looking for him for quite some time, and that she won't let go. Shadow Ushio stops the replay, and they return to the beach, but sees that Shinpei has a mark on his arm, where Hina grabbed him. Shinpei comments that Shiori's face changed when she grabbed him. He then recognizes it's the same girl from the festival. As it starts to rain, Shinpei decides to visit the old clinic, where he hopes to find some more clues about the shadows. After preparing, Shinpei and So meet to head for the mountain. Shinpei shows him that Ushio turned into a shell necklace, and is on his neck. On their way to the old clinic, So reveals that when he was in 4th grade, he tried to sneak in the clinic, but his father caught him and banned him from ever going in. Since they owned the clinic, So didn't think much of it, but he finds it weird that his father wouldn't ever let him in the clinic and wonders what his father is hiding. As they reach the clinic, Shinpei asks Ushio if she senses any shadows, but she denies it and pops out. So tries to scold her for not being serious, as she is in a swimsuit, but she states the same, as he is in a baseball outfit. Shinpei explains that having real clothes on would get in the way of her shadow transformations. They enter the old clinic and start looking around. Shinpei sees that the stairs for the 2nd floor are broken and asks Ushio to check it. So finds a medicine cabinet and old toxic medicine, which is extremely deadly. So then finds a wood statue that is holding a fish in its left arm, and so finds out that it is the god called Hiriko. On the 2nd floor, Ushio finds a cookbook and an old picture book of Hishigata family. Shinpei calls Ushio and asks her to go through a small gap in the wall. After lighting the room, Ushio sees a keyhole and guesses it's a door. Shinpei calls her back, but they can't break the wall and need to look for the key. Ushio feels hungry, and Shinpei takes out rice balls. As she stuffs herself, Shinpei realizes that the Hiriko statue also has a swelled stomach. Ushio reveals her scan can see inside of things, like human bones and organs, and as she scans the statue, she sees something in the statue belly. She takes a string of her hair and attempts to copy it, which becomes a key. With it, Ushio opens the secret door and they see a tunnel leading below, but Ushio warns them that she senses shadows. As they go down, So comments that it looks like an old underground canal, dug during the war. Shinpei guesses it has been abandoned for decades, and assumes that this is a path only shadows use. Shinpei tells Ushio to focus on protecting herself and So. Shinpei notes that if he dies, he will loop again, but if Ushio dies first, he may end up looping without her. Soon, Shinpei sees a human-shaped dark stain, however, Ushio senses that it happened a while ago. Ushio then senses the shadow, which is right behind the next corner. Shinpei goes to check and as he peeks, he sees a baby-like shadow, which is missing its top half of the head, which then erases a rat. Shinpei throws a rock, but the shadow doesn't react, neither to the sound or the light. As he gets a bit closer, the shadow smells him out. The shadow then escapes past Shinpei, who misses with his nail gun. As it heads towards So, he hits it with his baseball bat, but the shadow turns to its shadow form, softening the blow and then transforms again and jumps at him. The shadow manages to pin So to the ground. Shinpei manages to calm himself down, and then hits the shadow 3 times with the nail gun, making it unable to move. So then throws it at Ushio, who then kills it. The group then celebrates, but a moment later, Ushio feels weird, and states the first shadow she sensed is still around. As they continue, Ushio's arm starts to bleed, due to the injury Mio gave her previously. She had printed a new arm, but it seems she haven't recovered from the damage. She then prints another arm to stop the bleeding. Continuing down the path, So wonders if Ushio can copy the nail gun. Shinpei states they tried and she did, but the copied machines won't work until the original is erased, which will then make the copy work. Shinpei reveals his nail gun is a copy and that it has extra benefits, like if it runs out of nails, she can just print him a new one. They hear a gunfire, and then reach a natural cave. Ushio then feels they are surrounded by shadows. Multiple baby-like shadows attack them. Shinpei notices that the shadows are only targeting Ushio. So uses spray and a lighter to keep the shadows away. Meanwhile, Hizuru decides to go in the city sewers, and Neizu follows her. Mio tries calling Shinpei and So, but neither are picking up their phones. She sees hair ties on the street, and recognizes they belong to Shiori. Shadow Shiori then calls her, telling her that Shinpei is there. As she runs towards her, she encounters Tetsu. Mio then sees Shadow Shiori pointing to a manhole. They see the manhole is open, but Tetsu immediately is against going down, as we find out that he's a pretty big chicken for a cop. Mio states that if he finds the missing girl, he will be a hero and all over the news. Hearing that, Tetsu immediately goes into the manhole, but acts like he isn't doing it to be famous. Back to the group, Shinpei and the rest manage to escape the shadows. They reach a cave full of corals, and wonder how there are sea creatures there. Ushio tells them that all of the corals are shadows. Shinpei notices that Ushio isn't well, and that her wounds haven't healed. Ushio tells him that due to Mio's attack, she suffered data loss and needs to copy the original to regain the data. Ushio then erases her arm to stop the pain for now. Suddenly, Takiko appears with two baby-like shadows, telling them to turn slowly and not do anything strange, or Ushio will die. Ryu and Neizu reach a dead end, with metal bars blocking the way, realizing that shadows use these tunnels to travel underground throughout the island. Ryu wonders if they should go out and look for another entrance, but Neizu doubts there is one, at least not for humans, as the path ahead is no longer a normal tunnel, but looks like a natural cave. Neizu shares that his grandpa told him about the Hiriko Cave, a giant cave under Hitogashima. Until halfway through the Meiji period, there used to be an entrance that would show up at Hitogashima port during low tides. However, during the Sino-Japanese War, the army sealed it up. It's said that the cave is where Hiriko settled in, after washing ashore long ago. Ryu then hears something and they hide. Tetsu and Mio then approach. They see Shiori behind the metal bars, who then flashes and makes the bars disappear, allowing them to proceed. Back to Shinpei, Takiko congratulates them for surviving after trespassing on sacred ground. Takiko states she is there to retrieve a defective product and is glad that they brought Ushio. As she gets closer, Shinpei shoots at her shadow, pinning her multiple times with the nails, but Takiko just laughs. Ushio tells Shinpei that Takiko isn't a shadow. Shinpei decides the best thing to do is surrender. Shinpei realizes that since they still haven't killed them, they won't harm Ushio for the moment, and wonders if Takiko will take them to her father. So asks his sister why she's doing this. Takiko tells him it's natural that he doesn't know anything, as he wasn't chosen by their father. She tells them to leave their stuff and follow her, and she will lead them to Hiriko. Ryu and Neizu proceed, and reach the cave with sea flowers, which makes Ryu realize they are all shadows. Shiori appears, and Ryu explains that if she is alive, then it means she acted like she was killed, but escaped through the cracks on the street to the underground tunnel. Shiori wonders why they came, as she told them they will die the next time they meet. The Shadow's parent appears, mentioning it's been 14 years, but he doesn't really have business with Hizuru, and wants to know where the boy that stole Mother's right eye is. The Shadow wonders if he can kill them, and Shiori confirms. Neizu states they should run as they are the ones being hunted, and that this isn't a shadow of a human. The Shadow then shoots at Ryu, but Neizu jumps in and takes the bullet. He then proceeds shooting at Ryu, who manages to escape, but also gets shot. Looking at the blood, the Shadow states it's dark, which means he hit the liver, and Ryu won't have much to live. Getting closer, Shinpei and the rest hear a rumble, and Takiko explains it's Hiriko's stomach. Takiko then takes them to a large shadow that reaches the ceiling, and at its base is Hina, who states it's time to eat. Shinpei sees this as a chance to learn what she intends to do at the summer festival. Takiko explains that the being before them is Hiriko. When she arrived on Earth, the first human she copied was a little girl named Hina, and prefers to be called by that name. She is the god of Hitogashima, and mother of shadows. Lately, she is having issues walking, and needed a body replacement, which is why she uses Shiori as her copy to travel around the island. Hina turns to Shiori, and asks Shinpei how many times have they met. Shinpei realizes she was the one that killed Ushio, and has been in front of him the entire time. As Shinpei yells, Hina reaches for him with shadow hands. Takiko tells her she mustn't, and Hina stops. Takiko calls in Nagoro, a nurse who works at their clinic. Takiko explains that on average, 4 people die on Hitogashima every year, and they feed the dead to Hina. Her family has been doing it as long as Hina has been in existence. Nagoro brings 2 coffins. In one of them is Ushio. Takiko explains that they burned a fake body, and the bones they collected were printed by Hina. Shinpei asks Takiko if she knew that they were after Shiori and Ushio. Takiko states Ushio's death was a surprise to her, and never expected her to team up with her own shadow in order to save Shiori. So can't accept this, and yells at Takiko, asking her where their father is. Takiko yells back that it's because he is like this that she had to carry the burden of all of this herself. She had to do all of this because if Hina dies, their mother would die too. Their mother was sick, and their father asked Hina to turn her into a shadow, so she can live. Hina proceeds and flashes to eat the other dead body. She then turns towards Ushio. Shinpei knows that shadows can't move for a few seconds while they scan. As Hina prepares to skin Ushio, Shinpei asks Shadow Ushio to print it now. She then prints a nail gun in his hands, and he shoots at the baby-like shadows, freeing Ushio. Shadow Ushio then jumps in, and takes Ushio's body and scans her to regenerate her arm. Takiko states they can't win against the shadows. Ushio tells her that the Takiko she knows won't stand for this, and that Hina is using her to fill her belly. Hina had enough, causing Shadow Nagoro to transform into a more muscular form to go after Shinpei, but Ushio jumps in and starts fighting her. As Ushio regenerates her hand, she punches Nagoro's shadow and kills her. Shinpei gets close to Hina and prepares to shoot her, but the nail gun and his fingers get cut. The shadow parent cuts Shinpei's fingers and stands behind Shinpei. The shadow tells Hina that he will take Ushio's body back and shows he has Mio, but tells her to not eat her as she is an important hostage. The shadow warns the rest that if they move, he will kill Mio. Takiko is angry as they promise to not touch Mio. The shadow finds this foolish, as all the humans on the island would be dying tomorrow at the festival anyways. The shadow shoots at Takiko, but so gets in front and takes the bullet. The shadow is surprised, but shoots Takiko again anyways. Hizuru is still alive, but badly injured. Tetsu shows up and Ryu switches to Hizuru, who asks where Mio is. Tetsu reveals that a monster showed up and took her. He tried to shoot the baby monsters, but tripped and fell, dropped his gun, and then ran like a chicken. Hizuru states he probably made the right choice. She asks him to carry her deeper into the cave. Hina orders Ushio to come slowly. Shinpei tells her to eat him, since she wants to eat humans, but Hina rips his right eye. Hina states that to be able to defeat Nagoro, Ushio had to have become much stronger, and that it would be a waste to just erase her. Instead, Hina says she will reprogram her, as she starts to overtake Ushio. Shinpei yells, asking her to stop. His right eye then returns to him, making Hina realize it's impossible to take his power away. The shadow states that Shinpei's right eye overlooks the flow of time from a higher dimension, and observes multiple parallel worlds. He grabs Shinpei, and tells him he has the power to make the world he observes into reality. However, he tells him that he hasn't mastered that power, and he is only able to access it when he loses sense of himself through death. So he concludes that they have to keep him alive until the very end, when the festival is complete. The shadow then crushes Mio's skull, killing her. Tetsu shows up, and a moment later, Hizuru blows the shadow's head, freeing Shinpei. She knows she has one more shot, and shoots at Shinpei, but the shadow creates a shield, blocking the bullet, and also shoots at Hizuru, hitting her in the head and killing her. The shadow then shoots Tetsu, and kills him. The shadow starts to regenerate, mentioning it almost lost Shinpei. However, there is no one left to interfere. Shinpei thanks Hizuru and Tetsu, revealing he had picked up the bottle of poison at the clinic, which he already drank. As Shinpei is dying a slow death from the poison, the shadow guesses he must have died many times, seeing as how he was prepared to die through such a painful way. Shinpei tells him he will keep doing it until he defeats them. Hina tells the shadow to look at Ushio as she starts to reverse her corrosion. She even starts returning the corrosion back at her. Hina tells the shadow to kill Ushio, even if he needs to kill Hina. The shadow attempts to kill Ushio, but Shinpei takes her and starts looping back. In the higher dimension now, Shinpei tells Ushio that they will defeat the shadows, even if it costs him his life. Shinpei loops back at the moment he meets Hizuru and Neizu, and when Hizuru guesses that he is a time traveler. In that moment, Ushio also materializes next to Shinpei, holding his hand, and Shinpei states they just returned from the future. Shinpei returns to July 22nd, when he meets Hizuru. As Ushio loops with him, she jumps and hugs Hizuru, happy to see her alive. Neizu points his gun at Ushio, but Shinpei and Hizuru stop him. Hizuru wonders if she died, and Shinpei confirms. After telling her what happened, Shinpei wonders why he has this power. Hizuru explains that if his eye belonged to Hina, then it's made of shadows, and believes that Ushio gave him the eye. Hizuru asks him why he thinks they failed in his last loop. Shinpei explains one of the reasons is that they acted separately after defeating Mio's shadow, and wants them to work together this time. Hizuru agrees and shakes hands with Ushio, who shows Hizuru and Neizu her memories, as they now know what has happened in the previous time loops. Seeing her efforts, Hizuru starts to believe that Ushio is indeed their ally. Neizu states that if Shiori is part of Hirako, no matter how many times they kill her, she won't die, as Shiori is only a small part of Hirako's shadow. Ushio states that Shiori isn't strong, and that Hiriko's body is too weak and can't move away from the cave. Shinpei wishes they go directly for Hiriko, but if the four-armed shadow is there, they don't have a chance. He is also worried about the others. Ushio suggests they capture Shiori like last time. Once they do, Ushio will try to erase her. So wants to speak with his father about Ushio, but Saido refuses, stating he doesn't have time. As his wife insists to find time, Saido agrees, and gives So 5 minutes in his room at 10 p.m. Meanwhile, the group prepare to attack the Kobayakawas, and Hizuru switches to Ryu. A bit earlier, Ushio explains that she believes she can erase Shiori by basically hacking her code. Shinpei shares that in the previous loop, Nezu told him that Ryu was killed by a shadow and had strangle marks. Shinpei wonders if Hina was the one that killed him, and Hizuru confirms, saying Hina, back then, was also her friend. Next, Ryu enters the Kobayakawas and attacks Asako. Outside, since there are no other people, Shinpei tells Ushio that she can show up. As she comes out, she remembers something and pulls a string of her hair and prints the nail gun. Shinpei realizes she can take the data she scanned into other loops. As Nezu brought 2 nail guns, they name the first nail gun A and the second nail gun B. Ushio then scans the second and erases the original. Ushio's storage was full, so she couldn't copy nail gun A. The group then prepares for a message from Ryu. However, they are surprised when they see Ryu flying through the window. Ryu tells them to run, as this isn't the same July 22nd they know. In that moment, the four-armed shadow smashes Ryu's head with his hammer. Shiori asks Shinpei if he remembers when she told him she found him, and gave him the black mark on his hand. From then on, she tells him that he is forever in her sights, and that she can travel through space and time to follow him whenever he loops. The shadow then attacks, and Nezu shoots his shadow 3 times, pinning him. However, the four-armed shadow doesn't stop, and kills Nezu. The shadow then surrounds Shinpei, and is about to capture him, but Ushio cuts Shinpei's head. As the shadow is about to smash her, Shinpei's loop is activated, and Ushio vanishes with Shinpei. Hina says she's fine with it, as this was just a greeting, and knows that no matter how many times he loops, she will eventually catch up to him. While looping, Shinpei notes that he should have figured out the enemy had the same power as him. He asks Ushio if she is fine, and Ushio, who turned into his watch, says she is fine. Shinpei returns around their home, but is shocked when it starts raining, since it never rained on the 22nd in the previous time loops. He then sees 2 people, and recognizes one of them being Hizuru. He decides to go after them, but can't interact with anything physical. Shinpei is then moved into the Kofune restaurant, where Alan greets Hizuru and Ryu. Shinpei then realizes that this was 14 years ago. He realizes that this could be Hizuru's memory. As the place is full, Hizuru wishes to go, but Asako stops her, saying it's the 10th anniversary of Kofune restaurant, and she should celebrate with the rest. Masahito comes to celebrate as well, but as he enters, Hizuru tells him to leave. However, Masahito takes it that she is happy to see him. Shinpei even sees his parents there, who used to be marine archaeologists that spent a lot of time diving. Asako wonders if Hizuru is in a bad mood, and Ryu states it's his fault. She tells him she made a friend, and Asako wonders where Hizuru met her new friend. Hizuru states that it was at Mount Takanosu. Shinpei is then moved to Hishigata's old clinic in the mountain. Hizuru takes Asako and Ryu to meet her new friend. Hizuru explains that she always appears at the same time, but as they wait, no one shows up. Ryu and Asako decide to leave, but Hizuru had promised to meet her friend today, so she decides to stay. Moments later, Hina shows up, and Hizuru greets her. Hina apologizes that she didn't meet Hizuru's friends. She mentions that Hizuru is different, and that others are scared of her. The two continue to spend time together and play games, and Hizuru often brings snacks for Hina, but Hina mentions that she is getting more hungry, and that she hates it. One day, Hizuru meets Nezu, who warns her it's dangerous, as there are snakes in the forest. Hizuru wonders if it's not dangerous for him, and Nezu confirms it is, but notes that he gets paid to hunt the snakes. Asako and Ryu check the Kobe Mart, hearing that Hizuru brought snacks, and intends to eat them with a friend, making them realize she is meeting Hina. Ryu heads towards the clinic to bring some water to Hizuru. On his way, he hears something, and goes to check it. He sees Hina, who is bloody while eating a small animal. Shinpei yells for Hizuru, who ends up hearing him, but thinks it's her imagination. She sees a flash, and upon checking it, she finds Hina over the dead Ryu. Hina comes back to her senses and turns into Ryu. She starts denying it was her, and as she yells, a flash occurs, and her eye is blown away. She covers her left eye, but her right is exposed to the light. Feeling pain, Hina then retreats in her shadow. Two stray, incomplete shadows appear, looking like a mother and child. The child's shadow runs towards Hizuru, but Neizu appears and attacks it. A flash occurs, and the mother shadow turns into Neizu. Shadow Neizu then attacks Neizu and injures his eye. Hizuru hears her brother, and then takes Neizu and jumps away. As the shadows follow them, Ryu had taken control over Hizuru. He notes that he found her and had brought water. The child's shadow jumps at Ryu, who pulls out the knife Neizu threw, and then stabs the shadow. Ushio realizes that the data of Ryu bounced off Hina and entered Hizuru. Shadow Neizu comes behind Ryu, but he predicts it and dodges, then throws Neizu to the ground and kills him. Some time after that, Hizuru decides to leave the island, and Asako gives her a farewell letter. As she leaves with the boat, Hizuru sees Hina, who tells her she is letting her go since they were friends, but says she will kill her the next time they meet. Shinpei loops back to the 22nd again, heading towards the Kobayakawas, and tells Ryu they shouldn't go. Hina loops back in Shiori. Confirming what time it was, and the last times of the loops, she realizes the starting point is getting later. The four-armed, Shadow Shide, guesses it's because Shinpei's power is waning. Shiori is fine that they keep letting Shinpei loop, as that will give him less and less time, until he reaches his limit, thus they should focus on killing him, than keeping him alive. 1 hour later, Shinpei brings some food to Hizuru, and tells her he realizes that Ryu's mind entered inside of her. Hizuru explains that she prefers if Ryu doesn't fight, making Shinpei believe it's because she loves him, and wants to protect him. However, Hizuru reveals that he is a strain to her body, and if he seriously goes all out, he will shred her body. Hizuru believes that Mio will attack again, but will once again ignore Mio and go for Shinpei, due to orders from Hina, and with Hina's mark on Shinpei, they can lure her where they want. Meanwhile, Ushio shares her memories with others, so that they know what happened in previous loops. Meanwhile, Neizu is up a hill, observing and wondering from where the shadows will come. He hears something, and pulls his knife, but it ends up being an animal. A moment later, Shadow Mio stabs him in the head, killing him. After a conversation with the group, Shinpei suddenly sees a blink, and finds himself earlier at home, making him wonder if he died and looped back.
What a legend for making it to the end. See you in this next video.